Howdy, howdy! We are live on a Friday night, and while we're waiting for some more new Star Trek with Lower Decks coming up in just less than 2 months away, or like about exactly 2 months away, but that's not quite here yet. So we're gonna crack open some Star Trek comics and talk about another X-Men crossover. This time, it is the Next Generation, and I see there's already some people in the live audience anticipating us recapping and reacting.
Hey, we had a lot of fun with that first one. It was a really good time.
You know what? This is a much better story. So we kind of
Yes, it
made fun
is.
of that other one a lot, and kind of like some
Yeah,
of the dated 1996 comic book art. I think 1998 comic book art ages much better. But
it was reacting to the 1996 art. To be
right,
honest,
exactly.
Yes.
But I think we can go ahead and get the show started. I'm Fatheree,
this is Dave.
And I'm Joel.
and this is Tex-Trek. Except there's supposed to be an opening credit video playing. Here it is.
Okay.
Engage.
Welcome back aboard the Starship Texas for the 299th installment of the Tex-Trek podcast, the home of Star Trek fandom from deep in the heart of Texas, where we take a deep look at Star Trek, old and new. And tonight we are talking about the 1998 comic book, Star Trek The Next Generation and X-Men crossover, Second Contact. There's a fun little 64-page special that we will recap and react to. There's a lot of fun stuff to talk about in here. So if you have any fondness for both Trek and superhero action of any stripe, I recommend checking out this conversation. I have a lot of fondness for this particular era in like 1998. I was thinking about this. Like, this is actually like when I really started following comics like regularly and started, keeping up with what was going on in like the big two universes, like month to month. And there's
The big two, for those who don't know, being Marvel and DC.
Marvel and DC. So I'm really looking forward to talking about the X-Men running around with Picard and Riker, and we get some time traveler Wesley showing up, and like the MCU, they were pumping up the Marvel character Kang the Conqueror as like their new big bad until a bad actor, we'll say, ruined things. But if Kevin Feige had to cancel cinematic Kang, that's okay. These Star Trek comics are going to give us comic book Kang, so we're going to discuss Kang the Conqueror versus Wesley the Traveler.
Yeah, Wes got his moment decades before he got his shot in Picard and then Prodigy. So in these comics,
And
Yeah,
plenty of X-Men characters like Wolverine and Storm and Nightcrawler running around. So
there's so many things that came to fruition in the 2020s that they laid the seeds for in this comic.
I
yeah,
mean that's the cool shared universe thing.
Yeah.
all this has happened before and will happen again, right?
No, different shared universe.
Except they did improve the Travelers' uniforms. Not very great. They just,
Yeah,
They were sort of like overalls.
I agree. Prodigy did it better.
Yeah, sweaters were better.
But before we get into unpacking this comic book, I do need to do a little bit of housekeeping, and as always, give a big thank you and shout out to the wonderful Tex-Trek Patreon crew. That's Starfleet Sohel, Cake is Eternal, Crazy Dutchie, Joanne Robertson, John Daw, Geek Filter, Quark Spar, Stephanie Durantes, Matthew Averett, Braxton, Chuck A, Joel Vallis, Bingenium, Arthur Lamoureux, and our anonymous supporters. We like to celebrate with our patrons by having monthly watch parties, And the next one is scheduled for September 14th. We're going to be watching the first episode of Star Trek ever to air, because this will be right after Star Trek Day. But we will be watching The Man Trap. So some salt vampire fun.
It's good stuff. Apparently my volume's low. I don't know. Some folks are in the audience are saying that. So I'll try and get... hopefully I'll turn it up a little bit, and maybe I'll just speak up a bit too.
Let me see if I can.
Yeah, if you can give it a little oomph or anything, Fatheree.
There you go. How's he sound now?
This is Dave. This is me talking about Marvel Comics and X-Men in a sort of vaguely normal voice. Let's give it a shot.
Okay.
We also had like a little bit of news, not a ton going on right now, but I did want to point out that the effort to get Star Trek Prodigy A New Home worked out really well, partially because we flew an airplane banner over the Netflix building. The Trekkies are, the most activist fan base ever. We will take to action when people try to cancel our shows.
To the skies.
Yeah, or to the stars, right? Would be the.
Well, we're waiting for the permit for that part, but.
But yeah, the stars is a bit harder. But like getting a banner up above the LA sky rises is much more manageable. So we were able to get another play. I say we. I wasn't involved in this, but the Trek fans who organized the first airplane banner to find Prodigy a home were able to do the get another banner flying over the Netflix building to renew the show for a season 3. So hopefully we can get more Prodigy after that amazing second season that we all loved.
I like that they've got the go fast captain's thing slogan there.
Yeah, so the banner, it said, renew Star Trek Prodigy, go fast. So Netflix hopefully will feel inspired to give us that third season, because we all want more of those kids.
Yeah,
sure.
Prodigy season 2 wrapped strong, left us wanting more, so bring it on.
But not really anything else in the way of news, so we can go ahead and dive into this comic. But I did want to ask Joel. This is your first time on the podcast. I know that you've been on some
podcast, yes,
some Tex-Trek YouTube streams.
It's kind of like the crossover in the comic. Here I was in the chat for years, right?
Right.
And I've crossed over into the actual podcast with time in the reaction stream and. Sort of
you went through the Guardian of Forever,
STLV, and whatever, and.
But all the listeners who would like hear us say, like, whenever Dave and I say, like, oh, Joel in the live audience is saying, and now like they can just like hear this dude. They don't have to hear us read your chats.
Yes.
They can just hear it straight from the horse's mouth.
And finally, we can see what's behind you on shelves and things.
I know.
Like people used to see
my
refrigerator constantly.
I do miss your fridge, though. I kind of...
I know.
If I had a better graphics card, I'd put your fridge as my backdrop. But...
I will see if I can't, for 300,
take a picture of it, and then use that as your background.
Get a fridge background. It'll live again. But yeah, it's great to have you joining us.
Yeah, and Joel, I hope that we can have you back on Tex-Trek number 300, and I want to talk to you more then about your kind of relationship with Star Trek overall, but we'll save that for then, and just because we are talking about this X-Men crossover. Last time when Dave and I talked about the 1996 comic that crossed over the original series with X-Men, we kind of talked about our relationship with the X-Men. The long-time listeners going back to the old days might recall that like Dave and I used to make like a lot of like X-Men references when we were talking about Star Trek. It kind of like died down for a while, but now like we're talking about like literal like X-Men comics that like Marvel published in the 90s. So it all came full circle.
Like a cicada, and now has risen up and.
Right. Yeah, we were talking the 90s stuff coming back in the 20s. It was on like a 3-decade cicada cycle kind of thing.
Do that.
Just before reading this comic to talk about it on this podcast, did you have any relationship with the X-Men? And if so, what was it like?
Yeah, I started reading the X-Men in the late '80s, I think. And I would have read a lot more, but it was like money. I was like 10, and so X-Men were getting huge. Even I knew about them in small town Minnesota. But yes, I remember I would go and buy random X-Men comics, and then if not, that I would look at new ones on the spinner rack at the drugstore. Like I remember when Excalibur came out, like the first one, first issue of that, which I didn't buy, but I looked at in the store.
There's a little bit of crossover with this because some of the X-Men team here.
That's what I was thinking of that.
They were off in the UK doing adventures. That was like basically the UK X-Men team with more kind of Doctor Who-ish type time travel adventures. Mm-hmm. And but yeah, they kind of a number of sort of teams from people from various X-Men teams gather in the thing we're about to be talking about. Yeah. Did you do the cartoon, Joel? Did you do like the X-Men cartoon?
That was a little later, and I don't think I knew about it, and I would watch it sometimes. On its first run, I didn't really see it. I knew it existed. But then later, I had a job where I had to get up really early, and they were playing it at 6 in the morning. So I had to get up and be at work at 6:45. So I'd get up and eat breakfast, and I would watch, like, the first 15 minutes of it every day.
Yeah.
So I ended up seeing a lot, but, like, disjointed and not a whole episode.
I'm familiar with that kind of weird job formatting. I think one of the cartoons I grew up with, I raced home from school to watch it, and I would like miss the first 10 minutes almost always. And so that was, I only ever saw the last 15 minutes of Thundercats or whatever.
But you can still piece it mostly together,
Yeah, I got the gist of it.
Any particular like favorite characters that would like show up in X-Men stuff that stood out to you?
I think like everyone in the late '80s, it was like Wolverine, of course, I always liked Rogue too. Well, those two I think were my favorite.
Rogue is not in this one, is she? I guess she.
No.
I was not reading enough X-Men comics in the '90s to know this is as we'll discuss, is a very specific era of X-Men and is a very specific era of Star Trek. Literally, it takes place right after the events of First Contact. Was Rogue off somewhere? Fatheree?
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure.
Much happened. Well, always so much happened.
I think she was. I think at this time she was in Uncanny, and that's where like Scott and Jean are, because they're not in this.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's reasonable that the X-Men family had grown quite large at that point. They had a number of titles. They're not going to have every single one of them, and they needed to probably bring in some people who hadn't been prominently featured in the previous one and all that. So, we got a super chat.
Well, we'll go ahead and dive into this story, but I do want to say thank you to Matthew Averett for the very generous $20 super chat. Matthew says, "Thanks for the crossover talk. Have a great weekend, y'all." And you do the same, Matthew. But if people are enjoying these comic book crossovers, let us know, and we can. Star Trek's crossed over with a lot of stuff. Like Doctor Who seems to be making a comeback lately and is really popular. The Doctor has crossed over with Star Trek. So maybe before the next season of Doctor Who, if there's not a lot of new Star Trek content, maybe we'll have to bust out some Star Trek comic books then. But
show off some for our video people. Show off some of that cool J.K. Woodward art.
Oh yeah, one of the best artists to ever work on Star Trek comics, in my opinion.
Fatheree, before we do the dive in, I noticed on the cover of this that it says 64-page special. For people who don't know, the average comic is like around 22 pages, like a standard superhero comic. So this is actually a pretty big thing. It'd be like almost the equivalent of, it would be the equivalent of like about 3 comics. 3 standard monthly comics. So they gave it some breathing room.
Yeah, and I would say that they actually have the comic is like really well paced. I think just like it has a good flow for a 64-page story. There's not like a ton you can do even with 64 pages. Like that's still, in modern comics, that's still not like a lot of time to have like a lot of like deep character moments or anything. But that's the perfect amount of time for like a big bombastic action story like this.
Yeah, they're
but
trying to also sort of introduce. You can tell both sides. People either knew X-Men, try to introduce the Star Trek people, and vice versa a little. And, you can't do a lot, but they did a little. Like right now, they have the little bio blurbs to try to get you in there without having too much exposition. But
the bio blurbs, in general, I'm against that much text before you get into a comic.
I can see that.
It's too much. But I started reading them, and then I was like, oh, this is so cool. They're so specific in time that they mention.
Yeah.
There's like here's who Worf is, but also he's serving on DS9 right now, and like Data has his emotion chip activated. And over in the X-Men, there was what they mentioned. Angel, had become like Archangel, and Wolverine had the bone claws. And
Nightcrawler and Colossus they were off in the Excalibur team that we were talking about.
Yep.
So I actually kind of was impressed by the level of detail. You mentioned one of the writers on this. We talked about him off mic. Joel is Dan Abnett, who's known for he does a lot of licensed properties and Warhammer novels and stuff. And he's a guy who I feel like you can weigh in on this, but I feel like he does his research.
Oh yeah.
Would you say that's true?
Yeah. Because I've read like 6 of the Horus Heresy novels. I think he did.
Yeah.
Plus, I read some
of the most famous novels in Warhammer.
Yeah,
in the Warhammer
and
setting.
they're great. And I mean that IP is dense can be. And they were, treading new ground in the Horus Heresy. Which it basically takes place in 30K, 10,000 years before 40K. They're explaining how all this stuff happened. And,
right, big lore building.
It was just a little blurb in like one, thing of the original book, and then they had to expand it to like I think 57 books.
It's crazy.
I read all of.
That's how popular it was. Is that they're like, oh, we're going to be doing a lot more in this era. But yeah, he like brought. I think I know there is another writer on this. How do you say the other writer's name?
Ian Eddington.
Yes.
Eddington.
So I assume another Brett. That's a very Englishman name to have. Ian Eddington
has to be, but I don't know as much. I don't know anything about him other than I've recognized the name somewhat.
I looked him up, and I think I read a few comics he did, but that was about it.
Okay.
But Dan Abnett deserves a lot of credit for co-creating the version of the Guardians of the Galaxy that ended up like this weird comic book idea of like a talking tree and a talking raccoon in outer space. Like it ended up becoming like a $1 billion film franchise. A lot of that came from Dan Abnett as well.
I mean, I should say technically he didn't create those characters, most of them, but he and his writing partner, I think, Andy Lanning at the time, brought them all together in that very unique way that would become the template for the movie.
And made them into the Guardian, because the Guardians of the Galaxy had been like other characters previously.
That's right.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the story opens up like right after, from the Star Trek perspective, right after First Contact, and we have Picard and the crew of the Enterprise E, and instead of returning to the 24th century through that portal they take off with after they successfully corrected the timeline and made sure that Zefram Cochrane met the Vulcans and they dance around the jukebox, but then the Enterprise emerges in the 1990s. And instead of there being the eugenics war, there's the Thunderbolts hanging out in the Baxter building, because it's a very weird particular time, and as Dave was saying, for both Star Trek and Marvel Comics. But this was during an event called Heroes Reborn, when the Fantastic Four and the Avengers were gone. Everyone thought they were dead. And the Thunderbolts at this time, they were a team of villains pretending to be heroes, occupying the Fantastic Four's old base, the Baxter building. So if you have any fondness for like Marvel Comics in the late 90s or any memory of it, and you start reading this, you're like, oh, it's when all of that weird stuff was going on. Luckily, it doesn't have any influence on the rest of the story. It's just kind of just there and establishing the setting at the very beginning in the first few pages. But
you could not have a more specific reference than Thunderbolts, because
yeah.
In the comics themselves, they were, outed eventually, and so like they've kept that name around, but they've never been what they were at that very specific time, which was the public thought they were heroes, but they were secretly villains. That was only in this little slice of a moment.
Yeah, but they only appear on one panel, and you can kind of ignore them and not have to waste time wondering who the hell they are.
But part when I got to this, and then
I did too. But
I guess they really aren't going to come back.
I was kind of hoping they would be, but like the way that it turned out, I'm glad that they were only on one panel.
Room in the plot. It makes sense,
But the situation that the Star Trek characters are put on in the Enterprise crew is that they need to replace their deflector dish. Remember, there's like the cool action sequence in First Contact where they eject the Borg deflector dish, and Worf says assimilate this. So already it's like, oh, the people writing this comic actually watched the movie and paid close attention to the events. And yeah, it is kind of weird to see Data with like half of his face missing. But, it's good continuity with First Contact, and luckily they repair that pretty quickly. But to replace their deflector, they have to get some advanced tech that they can only find in the Baxter Building, home of the Fantastic Four, or Charles Xavier's X-Mansion, because the X-Men are friends with the Shi'ar aliens and have some of their alien technology. We talked some about that when Dave and I discussed that previous X-Men Star Trek crossover comic. So
yeah, I guess that the writers felt like if you came back looking for high tech, the Baxter Building is an obvious place, and so you have to mention the Thunderbolts if you're going to mention the Baxter Building. And basically, they just cross that off the list. They're like, no, we'll go to the other place. We don't want to tangle with these schools.
We don't want to deal with the Thunderbolts. Weirdos. Yeah, we don't want to deal with this weird Heroes Reborn stuff, but.
Man, it looks like Riker is dealing with some khakis there.
Yeah, we get some cool.
Slacks. Yeah.
We get some cool civilian. We get some cool civilian clothes when they beam down. Riker and Crusher and Worf all dress as like 1990s civilian, just random American people, and Worf has like this cool. I think it's like a cool look, but it's just like he just has like this
military look. It looks like a tank top you'd wear on like an army, depot in your downtime.
He's just got like this green cap on his head to hide his Klingon head ridges, and then just like this tight army green shirt with like a Captain America star on the middle.
Yeah,
it looks incredibly conspicuous, actually.
Yes. But it shows off his muscles and it looks cool.
Yeah, it's a cool like tough guy look.
You can't tell he's a Klingon though. It works, so it did the job.
Yeah. So I like seeing that, and what I also liked is they do the standard comic book when heroes meet each other. If as soon as you cross paths, you have a misunderstanding and you get in a fight. So as soon as Troy and Geordi and Data go to the X-Mansion, they cross paths with Wolverine and Colossus, and we get to see some cool action there. I got to see a Wolverine do like this cool, very intimidating and scary thing where he sneaks up on Geordi and then pops his claws, like one behind Geordi's head, one in front of his head, and then one like ready to go and I guess like stab him in the side of the head. He's just like, what the hell are you doing sneaking around our house?
That is Wolverine's classic interrogation technique, is 2 of the 3 claws.
I do really love. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, it looks like they're going for Cerebro, if even the people who've seen the movies know it's the big X-Men supercomputer thing.
Yeah. I do really love that they have Wolverine being Worf here. To show everyone what a badass Data is, he throws Wolverine instead of like on Star Trek, you throw Worf to show what a badass you are and how you're very dangerous.
But it was also really cool. Great. Like it was like, oh yeah, like Geordi is in way over his head, but his best friend is the super strong android who can just
puts a hand on his shoulder
Logan
and
around,
just throws him.
Yeah.
This is the equivalent of Spock nerve pinching, like one hit taking out Wolverine in the previous one. Now, and in both cases, Wolverine's like back up and ready to go in a few seconds, and he got the drop on Geordi, so he got to be cool too.
Yeah, but, it was really cool when I thought like Spock does the nerve pinch on Wolverine in that other comic, and then he immediately just like pops back up on like the next page, and Spock's kind of like, oh, they normally stay down a little longer, so we kind of get like that same reaction of like, yeah, Data can just like throw Wolverine across the room easily, but then what does Data do when Colossus comes up behind him? Is like, hey, you just threw my friend. So then we have like the giant Russian guy. People will know him from the Deadpool movies. But Colossus, the metallic powerhouse, strong Russian farm boy dude.
Yeah, he punches Data. Data like catches the punch, but like goes sliding back, like 20 feet from it or whatever. So a big, almost like an anime effect, really there.
Yeah, but I thought the art was really cool, showing the action of that, and then you get on that same page, you get this cool moment where Wolverine kind of starts piecing it together, and he's like, "Wait a minute, you're from the Enterprise? Are you some of Kirk's people?" And then it does this cut to Picard later after he's like beamed down to, explain everything. But he's just saying this cool line: "Captain James Tiberius Kirk, my most illustrious predecessor, it would seem the man made a habit of popping up where he was least expected." Which isn't exactly how Kirk came to meet the X-Men, but Picard would have like enough context to say something like this. It actually was like, oh wow, they really understood Captain Picard and how he would react in this moment. I think
it's kind of a classy way for Picard to say Kirk was always nosing around where he shouldn't be.
Yeah, but we don't have to waste time. We don't have to waste time like recapping that other X-Men TOS crossover. It's just like, oh yeah, Kirk and Spock got into all kinds of weird stuff. Like they met the X-Men one time. Why wouldn't they? Of course they did.
It's a very efficient and clever bit of writing to just have Wolverine be like, oh yeah, we already had an adventure with some of you guys. We don't need the full introduction. Just tell us what's going on now.
And another like indication of like, oh my god, these people actually know the source material. But Worf saying that he really doesn't like alternate timelines or parallel universes and stuff, because like the TNG episode Parallels, where he was bouncing all over the multiverse. So that was the obvious thing that they don't give us in this comic is we don't get a Captain Picard and Charles Xavier meeting, but the X-Men that are there are Angel. He's in like the movie X-Men First Class. He's like a dude with wings. He's in X-Men The Last Stand. We have Kitty Pryde, the girl who goes through walls. I mentioned Wolverine Colossus, Nightcrawler, the blue elf-looking teleporter guy, and then Banshee, the Irish guy who can scream. He can scream so loud he can like ride on the sound waves. But he is an X-Men First Class.
Kitty. The notable thing about Kitty is that she was kind of one of the original entry point characters for viewers. Who was like, she was a teenager and the youngest of the X-Men, and which makes it really clever later on when she kind of, partners up with Wes, who, not to get too ahead of ourselves, but Wes does show up.
Yeah. 20-some years ahead of Prodigy,
That's absolutely right.
Yeah, so they have this kind of a reunion meeting in the X Mansion. They're like, okay, so y'all are Starfleet people, but not the Kirk dude we met before. And then Kang the Conqueror shows up, who I guess was in the Ant-Man Quantumania movie, but the very different version than who's in the. Oh yeah, in Loki, I guess. Mm-hmm. I didn't see he was in the. That's what introduced him. He's in like season 1, I guess.
Yeah, he's in season 2 too, but like kind of different ones.
Yeah. Normally in the comics, he's like a dude from the future with like a time ship trying to change time or dominate the universe in some like weird future, and he's had like different origins over the years, so he's kind of a hard guy to sum up, but he's just
is kind of imperious though. He's one of those villains. He's a big villain,
Yeah.
Like Dr. Doom in the sense that he kind of expects you to like kind of kneel before him kind of guy.
Yeah, and he's normally involved with like big high stakes things. Like he's an Avengers villain, so normally like really big things that take like a lot of heroes to deal with. But he shows up at the X Mansion when the Enterprise crew and the X-Men are having their meeting. And he says, all of your timelines are in danger if y'all don't team up and do exactly what I do and travel to these points in time and try to correct these anomalies and set the timeline straight. So it's a cool little, I guess, setup for our story. But we eventually will learn that he is full of shit and that he's actually lying to them, and he's trying to get them to manipulate time in a way that won't keep the timelines from collapsing like he tells them, but instead will allow him to eventually conquer the universe in the future.
Yeah, and they're suspicious of him, but they kind of are like, well, we kind of can't take the risks. And he gives them these little. He's got like 8 of these little. I forget what they call them, quantum wristbands or.
Yeah, which is a very Star Trek thing.
Wristbands.
Yeah, chrono compasses. That's what they're called.
Yeah,
but we see those in like DS9 had that in when O'Brien was like time jumping. They gave him like one to like stabilize them, or like we saw him use those on Voyager, and then again recently on Prodigy season 2, they had Gwen have to have like one of those things like strapped on her.
Wes hands them out to everyone. Hers own.
So clearly these events happened, and then Wes remembers this, and he learned this from King, and that's why he's able to do that in Prodigy season 2. It would explain a lot.
Yep.
I like it. But yeah, this allows them to sort of do 2 teams of 4, and like 4 of them are going to go and like deal with one anomaly, and 4 of them are going to go deal with another anomaly, and you get a cool fusion of X-Men and Trek people.
Yeah, you press a button, and the wristband takes you to the anomaly. So.
Yep.
And
pretty slick. Yeah.
They do the movie thing where Riker stays on the Enterprise and Picard goes on the away mission, which is the opposite of, the TV show. It's always Picard stays on the ship and sends Riker, but then after, I always figure it's because of Generations, after his nephew and brother burn up, he has like a midlife crisis and decides he wants to be more of an action hero. At the same time that the actor Patrick Stewart was like, if I'm going to do these movies, I want to do like cool action hero stuff.
But Fatheree, it makes sense. Not just I want a midlife crisis and need to be an action hero, but also specifically maybe a little bit of a death wish. He's had a lot of tragedy in his life, and he might be like, you know what, maybe I go out swinging. But I like.
I don't want to die on a bridge. Yeah.
Yeah, It kind of works with, in a way, like it's a little silly, yes, that Picard, as he's getting older, is going on more away missions, but you can justify it with a little bit of in continuity stuff, which I dig.
But that's why we get
line must be drawn here.
That's why we get him here in the Days of Future Past Future, in the futuristic year of 2013.
Yes, what was it about?
When Star Trek Into Darkness came out.
And people may know this from the movies, and if not, if you've read the comics, you'll know it. But that's the X-Men's dark future. It's like it is what the Terminator's dark future is in the Terminator movies. Even kind of specifically like that because the big robots that have always kind of hunted the X-Men, the Sentinels. It's basically a world where they took over. It's also like a post-nuclear sort of world, so it's got a lot of it's a pretty messed up place. Oh, and who do we have on this team? So it's Picard,
Colossus, Troy, and Nightcrawler go to the Days of Future Past Future on Earth in 2013.
Which, by the way, we call it the Days of Future Past because that was the name of the famous storyline that introduced it.
Yeah. Yes. Which has also been made into a movie. And
the comic calls it out, too. It says, see, blah, 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 Days of Future Past.
Yeah, they made a point to, like, have somebody, like Nightcrawler or whatever, talks about it in such a way where he says the title, just as his normal dialogue. He's like, in those days of future past, who knew what was going to come next? I was like, oh, how clever.
But yeah,
well, go ahead, Father.
When they're running around from the Sentinels in this post-apocalyptic future, Picard does seem to like kind of acknowledge that I'm just going to follow the lead of like these X-Men dudes. They seem to like really know how to deal with this, and he almost seems to like kind of like admire them. And I like that Picard is able to like let them. He knows when he's out of his element, and he can like let the X-Men shine.
He mentions how they're having fun too. So.
Right. And I feel like when he's first saying that, he's like, there's some scavengers that attack him, just some human scavengers, and he's like punching one of them out, and he's like, I think there's a suggestion that he's maybe having a little bit of fun too, Oh yeah, because
because he's
he says,
Action
"Perish the
Captain
thought."
Picard.
Yeah. Troy, I guess, is the one maybe who says they seem to be having fun, and he's phasering him, and he's like, "Really? Perish the thought."
Yeah. Troy says Captain. I think Colossus and Nightcrawler are actually enjoying this.
Yeah,
But I think there's some
it's those
good
little
action.
moments, like Dan Abnett and Edgington, the writers. It's not just that's a specific Picard that was the movie Picard, which was what they were writing. They were writing it taking place right after the movie, and it seems like they went ahead and glommed onto it. They're like that. If that's the character that he was right at the moment, that's how we're gonna write him, and I thought that was really cool.
And what stood out to me even more was then when we see what the other team is doing with Worf, Storm, Data, and Wolverine, but they go to Wolf 359 and they're on Cisco's ship, the Saratoga, which I don't know if people remember this, but when we talked about the other X-Men crossover comic, I was kind of poking at the writer Scott Lobdell. I was like, he calls it a Constellation class. Or you tell me like he doesn't even know a Constitution class. But then I read this comic and I'm like, oh, these dudes know that the Saratoga is a Miranda class. Like Scott Lobdell didn't even know Constitution class, and these guys know Miranda class. That's not that that's like the be all end all of Star Trek writing. I doubt Nicholas Meyer gives a shit what a Miranda class is if I was to ask him, but. I appreciate the effort that these dudes were putting into it.
Yeah, they really did.
Joel, what?
Father, just real quick, I want to just briefly mention the artist on this comic is a dude named Cary Nord, who in the early 2000s was a very distinguished comic artist. Who did a pretty amazing run on a Conan comic that was actually quite celebrated at the time. A more ambitious Conan comic than they had done in a long time. But here he's a little bit getting his bearings, and his art's, I feel like it's not quite grown up yet, and that is a very ugly Miranda ship he drew, I gotta say.
It's an odd angle.
It's an odd
I actually really liked the art in this comic, and I thought I really liked the panel layout and the action. My only criticisms was that I thought sometimes there was less detail than I would expect, or I was surprised at how many panels didn't have backgrounds, and it all some of it almost felt like a little rushed.
I feel like these kind of projects are probably almost always sort of rushed just because of the licensing and
yeah.
Well, they go into that in the back of the comic is that whole making of.
Oh, I meant to read that, but I never got around to it.
It was really rushed. They didn't have much time, and so they lay out the timeline there. I forget what it is exactly, but it's not very long. They had a rush to get the writers and then Eddington and Abnett were like, no, we got this. They were like, we can do this. And then they had to rush to get an artist. They agreed, Nord, but they didn't have much time. So,
yeah, I think, honestly,
can't knock them for that. But.
Pretty impressive effort given that. And yeah, I do think, Cary Nord I think he's on his way here. I just think it's kind of his art is what I would call uneven, and sometimes he's having to draw some what I think are ugly ass 1990s costumes.
And you have to draw actual people, not just Wolverine from comics, but you have to draw.
Yeah, you have to get the likenesses in there.
More than 7 actors from TV and make them recognizable, which is a whole other thing than just drawing Nightcrawler and
It's true. Yeah, you're trying to balance two different kind of conceptual worlds, the quasi-realism of Star Trek and the kind of larger-than-life of Marvel Comics.
Which is why we don't actually really like these types of crossovers, and I don't think that these are something that I want a ton of or want to really encourage a lot of, but they're they can be fun, and and they did happen, so like it or not, we're stuck with them, so we might as well talk about them. But we get some cool stuff in here. I don't know why, but just seeing Wolverine run down a ship, cutting Borg drones' arms off with his claws, and then Storm unleashing a tornado within a starship. just kind of casually, like no one even making that big of a deal about it. But it's like, Jesus Christ, this is a Star Trek ship, and there's like a storm, of the X-Men is letting a tornado rip around in here. Like, that's crazy, but.
Yeah, I feel like Worf would be like, I want this away team all the time.
But when I was reading this, I was like, oh, I guess it's okay for the comic, but I'm kind of rolling my eyes like, why are there Borg drones roaming the Saratoga? And then, like, right after I think that Data even says, like, oh, it looks like history's been altered. There's no record of drones actually boarding these ships at Wolf 359. I was like, thank you so much, writers, for including that one little line of dialogue to make me feel better about this.
Yeah, they really...
You know, we all... Oh, go ahead, John.
Have that stuff in. They're just saying they really kept that stuff in there. Just little lines for the well, actually nerds, and then
we sometimes talk about this when we're talking about an episode of Trek where we'll say like one line could have fixed this one thing that left everybody scratching their heads, and I'm like, this kind of shows how easy it is to do that.
Right. That's why I try to point it out. I always try to point it out when I see it in action, just so whenever I do complain about it not being there, I feel like I'm a bit more valid, because at least I'll shout it out when I do see it. But yeah, there's like some cool pages of, I mean, like, I don't know, maybe just because like I love like 1998 comic book art.
I love
like
Sentinels too. I mean, they're always, I think, great looking.
Yeah, the Days of Future Past stuff looked pretty amazing to me, and the Wolf 359 stuff both. So if you want to see Borg action or Sentinel action, I think this comic
The only disappointing
has
part
it for
was
you.
when they have it's a little later than the page we're on now, when they have Borg Sentinels, and all they are Sentinels with like Borg on their face, and then like tubes.
That was disappointing.
Like, you could have done a little more.
It's just like the Borg are just riding in the Sentinels' heads.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just looks like a Sentinel with like 5 instead of having like a robot face, the Sentinel has like 4 or 5 Borg like strapped to the front of its head instead of the face.
I kind of liked how he drew it. It looked like some crazy shit from Mad Max, with all those dudes standing on cars.
What do y'all think of Kang's time ship? He's got like this ship. Is this a big ball like he's hanging out on at the end of time, wherever that is.
It looks good.
It's just down the street in the End of Time district. You'll see. Well, any weird time ships, I'm always worried. I was worried the E was going up against it. Honestly, I mean, I knew they would all live, but I didn't think. I thought it would be one of those. Phasers and quantum torpedoes do nothing.
Right.
But it turns out the E holds its own later. But
am I correct?
I do love Kang's chair. The panel here is Kang's in the middle of his floating control room on the ship, but he's in just a wooden chair. It's just
he's got like this
nice
old-fashioned chair and like a futuristic high-tech spaceship-looking setting.
Where he's floating.
It's a fun place to hang out and float evilly in your chair and monologue to yourself about your evil plan and how you've tricked the X-Men as well as the crew of the Enterprise into doing your dirty work for you.
In his
exposition
monologue,
for the reader is the key to all plans. So
a villain like Kang is great for exposition, to be honest, because it actually does sort of come naturally for him. And I noticed he referred to in like a caption on the previous page to Troy as the comely Betazoid. Just very very 90s too. Am I correct that one of the crew members that they name check in there is the dude from like the Lower Decks TNG episode?
You are correct. So the guy who got promoted at the end of that TNG episode, Lower Decks, Season 7, the guy who got the promotion, Sam Lavelle, he is seen serving under Riker on the Enterprise E, and I really liked this. It was a fun little way to show that, like, this guy who was, like, so nervous about Riker not liking him or, like, impressing Riker or whatever, it's like, oh, like, I guess, like, he got over that and he's still, like, serving with Riker. He's still like on the Enterprise crew, even though like they're a different Enterprise. They went from the D to the E, but they brought Sam Lavelle with them.
Yeah, that is a deep cut. Which I mean, that is some research done. Although it is kind of funny, he's kind of being a little bit of a baby about like being stuck in the Enterprise while everybody else is all off having the action scenes.
Yeah.
I wanted to fight Sentinels. Yeah.
But right after he says that, that's when the action kicks in when Wesley and the Travelers show up, and they're like, "You fools! You're doing all the Kang's work for him, and you actually have to stop everything Kang is telling you to do. Stop doing it." Get like Prodigy season 2 gave it to us, the Wesley and Beverly Crusher reunion, the mother and son finally reunited, but Marvel Comics gave that to us 26 years ago in 1998. The first thing Wesley does in this comic is he hugs his mom.
It's pre-Nemesis, yeah. So.
We've got to ask Aaron Waltke why in that last episode of Prodigy, why did they forget to mention that they had hugged previously during their adventure with the X-Men? I can't believe
Professor X alters their mind at some point.
Oh, okay. I mean,
yeah.
Forget that guy who looks like me. Forget him.
There's the Traveler with them, and they
the Traveler didn't
exposition too.
The Traveler didn't really look like the Traveler. They didn't nail that likeness at all.
That was hard.
I don't think I would have had any idea who it was had the text not told me.
I can't quite remember.
Otherwise, he just looks like a bald guy.
Yeah.
You don't really see the hints of the prosthetics he was wearing in the show.
Traveler was a bald guy, though, right?
Yeah,
that part's accurate, but
okay, I can't quite remember him, to be honest.
But this
there
does
was some
seem
prosthetics on his skull, and
okay, some classic TNG kind of.
And he had the 3-finger hand, sort of like Tellarites.
Oh, interesting. That's cool.
Which is in Prodigy. It's in those statues when they go to the
ziggurat.
Which I'd forgotten he had 3 fingers until we saw the statues in Prodigy. Like, oh yeah, I forgot.
I remember there were so many toys. There were so many toys of the Traveler in the 90s. Like, I guess, no one wanted him, but, they made a bunch.
Oh.
But every time I went somewhere and looked at, the toy aisle to look and see if they had any Star Trek toys, I would always find a Traveler figure. It would be at every store.
Oh, man.
It was actually just one Traveler figure traveling between stores trying to give you a message, Fatheree. You didn't listen.
I feel like that's what they would need to do with that figure is to be that's the only way you can get a Wesley Crusher figure is with the Traveler. Now Wesley probably wouldn't have been super wanted in that era anyway, but so maybe it wouldn't have helped. I don't know. But
yeah, on the page we're looking at now, the left picture, the leftmost one, kind of looks like the Traveler. But
yeah,
then,
that's
two
more
frames over,
likeness
it looks
here.
nothing like him. But
in the 90s, it would have been hard to get reference if it wasn't sent to you.
Yeah, pausing.
You'd have to, I guess, have the VHS probably.
Yeah, the VHS
of it.
and your own tape. Yeah, that would
your
be
own
it.
tape. Yeah,
I guess
they may have been
Starlog would have a still, but that's about it.
Yeah, I wonder if he's the artist is I taped it off of TV and I freeze framed grainily on it to try and draw it.
But when Wesley and the Traveler show up and find out, we've already sent 2 teams to go on these missions for Kang, then Wesley says, I'll have to go, just let them know myself. And Kitty and Wesley, they do have their little, their flirtation. They're around the same age, right? They're both like early 20s at this point.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Because they do have Banshee and Colossus are 2 people just to confirm to the readers yes, Kitty Pryde is an adult now, so it's okay that her and Wes, who was just at the academy, just he would have graduated from Starfleet Academy a few years ago, so they're both in their 20s. But
time works weird in comics, but when Kitty first showed up in the X-Men, she was about 14. So she had aged, a number of years in that time.
And Wes and Kitty go to Wolf 359 to tell the X-Men and Enterprise personnel there to stop following Kang's orders and stop trying to repair these weird incidences in the timeline. And we get a Ben Sisko cameo. Not just a Ben Sisko cameo, but we also have Proudstar.
James Proudstar, an X-Men who famously appeared to be kind of killed off in the first team up of the modern X-Men, and you know, it was a team that had Colossus and Wolverine and Storm all for the first time, and this kind of tough Native American superhero named Thunderbird, but he gets killed off, and in this revised or in this weird timeline glitch, the anomaly, he's a crew member on Cisco's ship.
Yeah, and so with him not supposed to be in there, I guess they were under the assumption like, oh, I guess Kang needs us to like save this guy, to save the timeline. That's kind of messed up, but I guess Wesley basically tells them like, no, sorry, you actually have to like let him die. But he takes a bullet for Cisco. He gets in the way of a phaser blast, and he saves Cisco's life and allows Cisco to go on and eventually become the emissary to the Prophets. And Data explains, you know, had these events not been allowed to transpire, the Prophets might not have gotten involved in our universe, and they won't be around in the future to stop Kang if he's trying to like take over the multiverse.
Yeah, another deep cut into Trek lore there.
But it makes sense if Kang wants to, you know, make sure like the Prophets don't meet Cisco, then he would, you know, I guess go back in time and make sure Cisco dies at Wolf 359.
And here, poor Proudstar, destined to only appear and then die like in his original comic
Always
appearance.
A bridesmaid. Yeah.
Or like Tasha Yar, because then we go into the X-Men event, you know, the instead of the Wolf 359, that really dark time of the Star Trek universe, we go to the really dark time of the X-Men universe of their days of future past future, and we see Tasha Yar clearly doomed to die in every reality. But
right.
Yeah, the same thing. It looks like, oh, I guess we're supposed to save her from these Sentinels, and it's like, Wesley and Kitty show up, and they're like, oh, actually, we gotta let poor Tasha die in this timeline too.
Is this darker than Tasha's past though? Because it's sort of like the same thing.
No, I don't want to go into details about like Tasha's homeworld, but I would rather exist with the Sentinels oppressing me than with than what she was dealing with. I mean, like, I hate to say that, but
yeah, it's always weird to compare tragedies. But, I think you're correct.
She had a cat there, but that was it. That was the only good.
Someone give us a story with a happy ending for Tasha.
Yeah. That would be really cool, and I feel like you could do it on something like Prodigy or something like that.
Yeah, maybe someday. We're looking out for you, Tasha. But Riker and Banshee and the Traveler go to Kang's ship so that the Traveler can disable some of Kang's automated defenses that he has there. And
like
I don't know.
Yeah.
There's a panel of Riker shooting a phaser and Banshee using his screaming power together side by side. And it's kind of cool if you like those characters. Otherwise, it's not much to write home about. But I thought it was neat.
My coworker Nick is like Banshee fan #1, so I'll have to let him know that Banshee did get a moment in this. He usually doesn't. He's usually almost just a supporting character in X-Men.
Yeah.
What are they fighting? It looks like they're giant mites.
Drones. Like Kang has these little robot drones on his ship, just like his little security drones.
Okay. Oh, so yeah, that's right. They're little robo-bugs, or big robo-bugs, I guess.
Yeah, from far away they look kind of Borg-like. It's confusing, but they're not.
Yeah, so not particularly excited. They're like the B team, or I guess they're like the C team. Just like Wesley and Riker and Banshee. They're not as cool as like Picard or Wolverine.
Yeah, but they get to attack Kang himself. Those guys are off dealing with side problems. They're like, let's take down the big bad.
But they're not actually fighting Kang. They're just fighting these lame little like insect robot drones.
So you got to work your way up. You got to start.
They're Kang
with
adjacent, Father. Yeah, they're working their way up.
But one of
the big boss. No.
One of the cooler things going on with the in the days of future past action was that when Wesley shows up with Kitty, Picard immediately is like, "Oh, I guess I got to like listen to Wes. Like he's gonna know what's up." I just love him like turning to Wesley so quickly,
like deferring to him.
Yeah. But
yeah, they treat, you know what, like, it is true. This was not at a time when it was really popular to show respect for Wes, and They,
Yeah.
it was kind of like they saw where fandom needed to go, and where the writers needed to go, and they treated him seriously, and they're like, oh, that little throwaway ending he got with the Traveler, well, we're gonna like say that, yeah, he's gained power and some knowledge, and he's gonna be treated fully seriously. So much respect to the two writers for that.
And was that like Ron Moore's idea to be like, everyone gave the show so much shit about having a Wesley Crusher be the be all end all and like the know it all kid. I'm just gonna have his ending. He's just gonna ride off into the sunset and be like, oh yeah, basically like I am like a super genius to the point to where like I can like exist beyond this plane of existence. It's like, and then we get like this story here where it's like, oh, we need like the ultimate savior Wesley Crusher to show up again, but they did like the thing everyone complained about, and they turned it on its head and they made it cool. They made us like it.
Yeah,
but yeah.
Although I wonder, did some people reading this in the 90s were like, oh my god, Wesley showed up?
Probably. I mean, I'm sure there's some people still like that now. There's probably some people like that on Prodigy season 2, but
that's true.
We get like this cool climax. Everyone beams back to the Enterprise E, and they're able to take down Kang's ship because the defenses were disabled. And we get like a cool explosion, very very comic book, very very over the top, very dramatic. But it was the super dense quantum material made from a white dwarf star that powered his ship. They got that to collapse on itself and seemingly end Kang.
Do you mind going back to? Okay, yeah, that's the right page. Sorry. Back to where you were just a minute ago. The Traveler looks like that actor Jeffrey Tambor. if people know who that is. Sorry, you may know him from
What is he in?
Oh my god. I don't remember. Was he on the Larry David show? Did you ever see that? Arrested Development.
Oh yeah, I'm looking at a picture of Jeffrey Tambor, and yeah, I've seen him in seen him in all kinds of stuff, and yeah, he could play the Traveler.
At least as drawn there. But yeah, they get their big like everybody fire, everybody do the thing, and Kang's ship gets wrecked.
I was proud of the E taking down Kang's ship. It made me feel good.
Yeah, if you're a fan of the Sovereign class, this is one of the we really don't have a lot of Enterprise E action. It just appears in 3 movies, and that's it. And then there's very rare that we ever see a Sovereign class in anything else. So this is some of the coolest shit I've ever seen a Sovereign class do in anything.
By the way, I want to make a quick gripe here, since you can see it on these pages. Whenever Picard narrates his captain's log stuff, they actually do it like a little LCARS narrative caption, and it's a little bit messy.
It's hard to read because Mike Okuda wanted the LCARS to be an impact font so that it would be hard to read for audiences to read it, at home, and they wouldn't be able to just read every single letter of every screen all the time.
Right, it would look futuristic and cool, but not be so legible that you'd be doing.
They wanted to hide all their Doctor Who references they were putting on the screen. Yeah,
I agree with you. I thought those captions looked a little ugly, but what I thought was cool and a cool comic book thing to do that's kind of unique to the medium of comics, which I love. I love the medium. And I love when I get to talk about Star Trek in comic book form on the show. It's really cool. So if people want to hear more comic book talk, let me know. And we'll see if we can do more of that in the future. But when they would do the captions with the division color of the character and then their rank pips, for Data, it would be in gold, and it would show 2 gold pips and then 1 black pip to indicate, oh, this is Data. This is the gold lieutenant commander person talking. I thought that was a really cool touch.
I don't always know the pips as well as some of y'all do, so I kind of thought it was a little bit messy. I always prefer that to be obvious from context and stuff like that. I wasn't. I think I was mostly anti-caption in this one, but actually, what was written in the captions was totally cool, good writing, good solid writing. But yeah, I don't really like the. I find it a little distracting when there's little things to tell me who's reading, and it's too much. It's a little too much.
And speaking of captions, I also liked that King didn't have captions and that he said all of his thoughts out loud in voice balloons, because it just looks prettier on the page to see like these balloons coming out of people's mouths. I think
Thought
it looks
bubbles.
more like a comic book.
No, he said those. Yeah.
No, I want to picture this dude sitting in that wooden chair on that spherical ship just talking to himself about his evil plans. But
when
you're all
floating
alone and you can do that.
What's that?
When you're all alone and you're evil and you've got a master plan, you get to talk to yourself.
Yeah.
It's just the rule.
Yeah, and it looks cooler when you're like floating there and the camera's down below you, so you rise up like some imperious pyramid over them.
They show the bottom of Kang's feet a lot in this comic.
Yeah, you would almost think that
Tarantino floating above you. So.
That Tarantino had something to do with it, but there's a lot of Kang.
Sexy Kang feet. That's right. Purple boots.
Yeah.
Oh, I took a strange turn, but.
And it ends on a cliffhanger, Fatheree.
It does. We get
that sets up the final of what would be 3 X-Men Star Trek crossovers.
Yeah, the X-Men help repair the Enterprise E and send it on its merry way, and it's unfortunate that we don't get to see Captain Picard and Professor X meet ever, but after the Enterprise E leaves, there's all of a sudden a big blinding flash of light in front of the X-Men where they're hanging out back on Earth outside of the X-Mansion, and Nightcrawler turns around and he says, "Hey, what is this? Now, how can this be?" And Wolverine says, "Good question, Elf, good question." And we just get a little bit of text saying, "To be continued in Star Trek The Next Generation X-Men novel Planet X on sale in April." That would have been April of 1998.
Crossovers got to keep going. Now it's in novel form.
Although I think they, even though there was clearly some rushing and behind the scenes haste for all of these, it seems like they planned it, pretty well as a multi-medium trilogy. So you get the special with the comic special with Kirk and the Enterprise, Kirk's crew. Then you get the TNG crew crossing over with the X-Men in this comic special, and then you finally
with
wrap
some
it up
DS9 in it because Cisco's here.
That's right. But yeah, it was ultimately a nice little finite event. A little hasty in times, but I think they're all kind of at least fun. My memory of the book, which I've read, is that it's pretty good. And maybe we'll get around to it at some point.
Yeah, I have not read that.
We'll get around to it or something.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like it felt like the time was right to talk about like this comic because we covered the other one in the wake of X-Men 97 arriving on Disney Plus, and we just had like this popular mutant movie now with Deadpool and Wolverine, and just like learning like we're not gonna get Kang anytime soon in the MCU. It's like, well, if people want Kang, we can explore this cool like Kang story that involves Star Trek here, but. If people do want to hear us finish the trilogy off and discuss this Planet X novel, then please let me know, and we can make that happen.
The downside of Planet X novel is you don't see much of the underside of Kang's boots in it. It's not really
maybe they described them in detail and you just forgot.
But you do. Someone in that novel does point out, like, hey, Professor X and Captain Picard do look an awful lot alike. So, we don't get that here, but you can get it there in the novel.
Right, and that was before the actual casting, as I recall.
Yeah, because we're still, what?
This is still 2 years away from the movie.
Close, but, like, it could have been, like, in early talks, but definitely it hadn't, that was... it was a popular fan
people
casting.
Were talking. Yeah, people had been talking about it.
Fans wanted it to happen.
Yeah,
and it did.
People had probably been talking about it for like almost 10 years by the time this comic came out. I remember that like all through the 90s, people were talking about like, yeah, they need to do an X-Men movie and it needs to be Patrick Stewart.
Yeah, the fan casting has been heavy, for sure.
And sometimes fan casting is stupid, but that was a good one.
Yeah, it was. With an actor that good,
Right.
If you do it just on looks, yes, it can hit you and not be good. But
turns out Patrick Stewart has it in him to play the serious schoolmaster of a team of superheroes.
Yeah, arguably his second or maybe even most iconic role he's ever done. You know, that's the only thing in his career that rivals Picard.
Oh, for sure.
True.
Yeah.
But I don't know about y'all, but out of these two comics that we've talked about here, like I don't think either one is particularly great, but I think this one is much better than the last one, and it's a lot of fun and like what I would actually like want and expect out of a big corporate, you know, franchise crossover thing like this.
Joel,
Yeah,
did
this
you
was
read
a lot more
Were you
fun.
able to read
It
the
just-
previous one, Joel?
Oh yeah, I read the other one. When you guys did the show on the TOS X-Men crossover, I read this one too, because I was
Oh,
like,
okay,
well,
yeah.
it's just comics. It's pretty easy to read. I was like, yeah, this one's way better. Just the
Yeah,
story.
and I think Abnett is a better writer than Scott Lobdell. I mean, that's just how it is.
But I'll say this about Scott Lobdell, like having Gary Mitchell as like the mutant, as like the X-Man of Star Trek, like that made sense. That was a good call. Assuming that was his idea, not something that like came from editorial or something. But
right, he had that was like I think his best idea in there, other than generally getting the voice of Kirk and Spock and McCoy, was that Gary Mitchell, a type of mutant, and Phoenix, the mutant so powerful she was condemned to die. There would be a weird meeting between them where Gary Mitchell could make a reasonable pitch for her that she could be next on the chopping block if they take him down, and I was like, that's actually pretty clever.
But I'd be curious what people think. If they liked this story, if they liked it more than the other one, please comment and let me know. What were you saying, Joel?
I was just wondering if Gary Mitchell took Phoenix aside at one point and was like, "You ever been to the Galactic Barrier? It could do wonders for you."
That would be Yeah, what would that do to someone with
Phoenix should
her
get
level?
More powerful than ultra powerful, super powerful Phoenix, but who
the
knows?
term, the weird term that Star Trek used in Where No Man Has Never Gone Before and then Never Again, but the Espers with their ESP rating. But you would imagine like Jean Grey would have like the highest effing Esper rating like anyone has ever had, before she goes to the Galactic Barrier. So
yeah,
I don't know if that would be like, that wouldn't be Dark Phoenix. That would be like some color beyond like the, I don't know, ultraviolet, whatever's like beyond dark, like infrared,
like quantum Phoenix or something like that, maybe. Yeah. These stories do suggest themselves. If there was like, they did What If comics. It used to be kind of like specials they did every once in a while in the 80s. Then in the 90s, they just made it a monthly series. I'm not saying these would produce great comics, but you could do a bunch of different X-Men Trek crossovers easily. There's so many different famous eras of X-Men now. For people who've been reading it in the last 5 years, the Krakoa era, where they had their own like sort of sovereign nation that did international trading and had a council and Game of Thrones like elements and stuff like that. That feels like that could work into something. I feel like that needs to tie into like a Klingon Civil War type stuff. It's weird, but. And I know this would never happen, but like you actually could tell lots of different stories crossing these characters over if you wanted.
And we still haven't had Voyager show up in any of these, right? So.
Yeah. And it's funny, I think in the audience people were talking separately about Lower Decks, but yeah, do a Lower Decks crossover with X-Men 97 or something like that.
Oh, that would be fun to see. Yeah, the animation on that would look really cool. Like to have like the X-Men 97 characters like running around the Cerritos and just being like, what the hell is this?
Yeah, you could go ahead and have the whole issue drawn, with that cel-shaded animated idea. But yeah, as wild as it would be, I know it is not destined to happen. These guys, these companies are not about to shake hands and do more crossovers. But yeah, they're both ensembles with kind of rich characters and enough thematic overlap and progress. They both kind of are like all about like sort of like action adventure stories, but with progressive philosophizing, along the way. So they're surprisingly good friends. I feel like conceptually.
And we
And
got some Star Trek characters with Kirby dots in the background, so I mean that's always nice.
yeah, I love if you can combine some Kirby crackle with Trek, you're doing something right.
So many of those powerful energy creatures and stuff that were the pure energy aliens, especially of TOS, but there's every era has them. Could be redrawn and reconceptualized with some Kirby style energy.
Kirby was better at portraying those than TOS. It's true. But the medium was better. Comics was easier to do that with than TV. So.
Yeah. Kirby was just so mighty at what he did.
Oh,
He created his own iconography of art style, of weapons and armor and energy and all that stuff. So,
well, that's something they could do too. You could get Q and then Galactus and then whatever you do there. That'd be fun.
Yeah, the ideas they're there, people.
The possibilities are endless.
Yeah.
But I don't know if there would be like the audience, the readership with like enough appetite to.
Sure. We just need to travel to the right universe where there is enough appetite for
But
it.
in like 100 years, assuming that the microplastics haven't wiped us out, like all of these characters will be like public domain, and anyone with the time to draw it can draw any of these stories they want into a comic.
You won't need to draw it, Father. You'll just ask AI art to do it, and we'll have these awesome six-fingered adventures of these characters. Just kidding.
Yeah. Wolverine has like 5 claws come out of his hand instead of 3, or like something like that.
His costume changes.
Disney will still own the copyright on the 6-fingered Wolverine, so you have to draw the original 5-fingered with the white gloves only.
Oh, that is I guess one final thought that I'll have on the last page when they part ways. Wolverine has given a cigar to Worf as a parting gift. But I like that like Wolverine and Worf have like a bit of bromance. I would like to have them more like screen time together. And it did remind me of like this was back in the 90s when Wolverine was allowed to smoke in the comics. He's not allowed to smoke anymore, even though he regenerates his lungs. But Hugh Jackman can still smoke in the movies.
Yeah. It was a little bit of an editorial edict. It's not as someone whose dad died of lung cancer, I kind of on one level I'm sort of glad that they did that, but yeah, it's also stupid.
Yeah, that's kind of where I land on it. I'm kind of like torn also, but it is what it is.
Yeah. Over at DC, if you're British, you're allowed to smoke. That's their version of it. Constantine and Jenny Sparks from The Authority, they can smoke.
Well, Joel, any final thoughts on Star Trek: The Next Generation, X-Men: Second Contact?
Just one thing. There's I didn't get mentioned, but there's one great line when Picard, just before he phasers one of the Sentinels, and he yells out, "No one vivisects my crew members," which I don't know if it's a really big Picard line, but it was hilarious in the comic. And you really shouldn't let anyone vivisect your crew members. He's right. But
so does that mean it would be okay with like people on like a different crew? It's like if they're my crew, like you're not cutting into them.
Vivisect civilians all you want, just not on the ship. And Prime
it's
directive,
acceptable on the Farragut, not on the Enterprise.
Yeah, well,
I see how it is.
Yeah, you're right. That is there's a few very comic book lines in there.
But what's funny is that like I have such different like expectations for comics and for like superhero comics, and a lot of the stuff I would not tolerate if it was in like canonical Star Trek, but because it's in a comic book, it's I get to have like I don't expect the same level of like realism, I guess, from my Marvel DC comics that I expect from the Star Trek universe. So I kind of like grade a lot of that stuff on a different curve with this, and I guess it's also partly like I'm partially glad that the Star Trek expanded universe that we don't keep our novels and comics canon, because it allows you to have like more fun and not have to worry about the consequences as much.
Right. There is something to the self-containedness. Fatheree, I was just skimming through my notes, and I I jotted down a line that I think is very Picard when he's assessing Kang. He says, "I've no stomach for his schemes," and I was like, "Oh, that's a pretty Picard line."
These dudes have watched some TNG episodes. They got that voice down pretty well.
They're Englishmen.
Yeah, the turn of phrase is perfect for Picard.
I almost didn't mention this, but since we are talking about like cool lines, one line was Wolverine talking about Worf having all the cool lines when he turns to Storm and he says, "Ro, he's stealing all my lines," because her name's Aurora and he calls her Ro. So that was like a cool little. It's cool to see that too.
I didn't think about.
And then we have a Ro in Star Trek also with Ro Laren with ensign, then lieutenant, then I think she dies as lieutenant commander, right, or commander, and so commander. I always want to call her Ensign Ro because that's like the name of the episode that introduced her.
But thankfully
she can't be an ensign forever. Like Harry Kilm is our only forever ensign.
Literally, by the way, watching that episode today, just by weird coincidence. Had nothing to do with anything.
But I talk about Star Trek in front of you all the time, so it's not that weird that happens.
No. But yeah.
Everyone loves Ro.
If that's what we need is a Ro on Ro crossover comic.
There you go.
That's what saves her
in Picard season 3. Storm comes.
You know what? God, these things I'm starting to think like, you know how like Gambit was like a thief, and Storm too when she was a kid was like a cut person thief kind of thing. I'm like, I want that to somehow cross over and have like an adventure where Gambit has like a side mission with who's Picard's archaeologist Tomb Raider girlfriend?
Vash.
With Vash, I'm always trying to work her in.
Yeah.
So Gambit and Vash get to go off, and Picard's like, he's trying to steal my girlfriend. There's so many possibilities here.
Yeah, I didn't think we were gonna pitch all these ideas to Marvel
free,
and
no
IDW,
less.
but yeah, like if y'all want to partner up, like here we've given you plenty of material to like go forward and make some comics.
Yeah, all you need to do is just go IDW and work out a deal with Marvel. I know it's always very easy to do that.
IDW did some Star Wars stuff with them, so it's possible.
That's true. There have been a little bit more friendliness between companies. In the 90s there was a big era of that, and then there was in the 2000s there have been a lot of crossovers. But Marvel and DC stopped being friends when the movies became big.
When Disney bought Marvel, but for the first time ever they've loosened up on that this year. So
right, they're reprinting some of their classic crossovers and things. So maybe now is the time. Okay.
We'll see what happens, but otherwise, we won't have a show next week. Tex-Trek is going to move into a bi-weekly format, just for a little while, just until Lower Decks gets here in October. But in 2 weeks, we will be back. You can watch us live Friday, September 6th. We will be celebrating our 300th episode. Going to be a big one. Yep. And also Dave's final show as the regular co-host of Tex-Trek.
Yep. I get blown up in 300. I get is actually
you have
going
to
to kill
stand
me.
at the pass and defend against all the Peloponnesians.
Oh jeez.
Oh. I was gonna put like a big glass wall in between us, and then cry and watch you die from the outside of it.
Fatheree, I'll be like, podcast out of danger.
But no, it'll be fun, and Dave will return in the future for special events, like a possible X-Men crossover novel conversation if we ever get around to discussing the Planet X novel. So again, if people want that in the future, let us know.
When Dave returns, he'll be more of an action hero because it's his midlife crisis.
Yeah. He's gonna swing in.
I'm gonna roll up in that dune buggy thing that Picard was in.
Oh, I thought you were gonna swing in on a cable like Tarzan when Picard's swinging around engineering in First Contact.
Yeah, sure. That sounds good.
That's good. How you swing in on that and then leave on the dune buggy.
Yeah, no, I was picturing me coming in on the dune buggy. I just immediately crash, and then I'm just unconscious while the podcast begins, while the live stream goes.
Action heroes aren't unconscious.
But in addition to having some fun with Dave, Joel is also going to be there, and my partner Taylor, who's been watching all of Star Trek for the first time in release order, and she's halfway through it. We started with the 1966 stuff, and we're in 1995 now, so that's exactly halfway. We're 29 out of 58 years.
I've been really enjoying
coming up to this comic,
journey.
Kind of. Yeah, you're almost up.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
We're about to hit first contact. So maybe after that, be like, here's a comic with the X-Men in case you care about this. But
but then she'll have to start with the X-Men issue 1, and then oh my god, it'll take forever.
It's a good time for her to make her podcast debut, though, and we'll talk about some of her reactions to the first half of Star Trek. That's all she's seen so far as the first half. But people, follow me on socials if you want to see hashtag Taylor's Star Trek Mission. We are posting videos about her reactions to the different movies we've watched and the shows that we're finishing. We just finished TNG, so we'll have a video on that soon. And I encourage people to keep up with us on Twitter or Instagram or whatever social media platform you're using. We're probably there. Just follow me at Texs, and you'll see those updates. And please come back in 2 weeks for Tex-Trek number 300. It's a show that's been 8 years in the making, 300 episodes, so it's a big deal.
I will play the role of King Leonidas.
Yep, bookended by X-Men the whole time.
That's
Joel,
right.
Are you Xerxes? Are you the enemy then? Like.
Yes, I will be.
Okay.
And,
well, I'll be the.
I'll have to get a lot of servants. I don't have any. Shoot, but
Fatheree, I'm afraid you
I'll
have to be
look
the
out.
hunchback.
Well, it was either that or like the traitorous guy in the Senate or whatever. But
Yeah.
I forget
that
his
movie
name.
kind of sucks. That's a movie like I've only watched intoxicated, and I am convinced if I watched it any other way, I would hate it.
I did
but-
go see it in IMAX. It looked pretty in IMAX.
I'm sure it did. But I think Tex-Trek number 300 will be just as good as that Zack Snyder movie, if not better. So
I'm gonna shoot for better than that. I'm gonna see what maybe in the off chance we could do it.
no, I think we will. Folks need to come back in 2 weeks and find out. But until that time, as always, live long and prosper, y'all.
Listen to the Tex-Trek podcast through Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or at tex-trek.com. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/tex-trek. And follow Fatheree on Twitter at TXTrek. Please support us by liking our videos and subscribing to our channel on YouTube. Thank you and take care.